The rain had been falling for 3 days straight at Fort Harrison, turning the training grounds into a maze of mud and standing water that reflected the gray November sky like broken mirrors. The sound of boots splashing through puddles echoed across the compound, mixing with the steady drumbeat of water against metal roofing and the distant hum of generators, working overtime to keep the lights burning in the perpetual gloom. Steam rose from the wet asphalt in thin, ghostly wisps, carrying with it the scent of damp earth, diesel fuel, and the metallic tang of rain-soaked chain-link fencing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mylene Carter moved through this landscape like a shadow given form, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun that somehow managed to look both perfectly military and completely unremarkable. Water beaded on the shoulders of her field jacket, rolling off the treated fabric in perfect droplets that caught what little light filtered through the overcast sky. Her boots found the driest path through the maze of puddles without conscious thought, each step placed with the kind of precision that spoke of someone who noticed details others missed. The canvas messenger bag, slung across her shoulder, rode steady against her hip, protected by a waterproof cover that she had added herself, a small modification that no one else had thought to make. The intelligence wing of Fort Harrison stood apart from the main compound, connected by a covered walkway that channeled the sound of footsteps into an echoing percussion against the aluminum roof. Here, the buildings were newer, their windows tinted dark enough to prevent casual observation, but clear enough to allow those inside to see out. Security cameras tracked movement with subtle mechanical precision, their lenses protected by small hoods that kept the rain from obscuring their view. Access card readers blinked red and green in steady rhythms, their LED displays casting small pools of colored light onto the wet concrete. Mylene approached the main entrance to Building C, home to the Central Intelligence Analysis Division, with the same unhurried pace she brought to everything. Her keycard emerged from an interior pocket with practiced ease, the lanyard attached to a retractable reel that never tangled, never caught on anything, never drew attention to itself. The reader chirped softly as she passed the card across its surface, the LED shifting from red to green with a mechanical precision that had become as familiar as breathing. The magnetic lock disengaged with a soft click, and she pulled the heavy door open just wide enough to slip through. The sound of rain immediately muffled by the building's thick walls and careful acoustical design. The interior of Building C was a study in controlled environment and institutional efficiency. The floors were polished concrete, sealed to a smooth finish that absorbed sound without collecting dust. Fluorescent lights hung in protective fixtures overhead, their output carefully calibrated to reduce eye strain during long hours of document analysis and computer work. The air smelled of recycled atmosphere and the faint ozone scent of electronic equipment running at full capacity. Somewhere in the background, the subtle hum of server cooling systems provided a constant, white noise that made conversations difficult to overhear from more than a few feet away. Mylene passed through the security checkpoint with the same quiet efficiency she brought to every interaction. The guard at the desk, a staff sergeant named Phillips whose red hair was beginning to show gray at the temples, looked up from his paperwork with the kind of automatic attention that came from years of routine. His nod was polite but impersonal, the acknowledgement of someone who saw dozens of personnel pass through every day and had long since stopped trying to remember names unless they caused problems. Mylene returned the nod with equal politeness, signed the logbook with handwriting that was both legible and completely unremarkable, and continued toward the elevator banks without breaking stride. The elevator car was empty when it arrived, its brushed steel interior reflecting her image in a dozen fragmented angles. She pressed the button for the third floor, where the Regional Analysis Section maintained its offices and secure workspaces. As the car rose with mechanical smoothness, she could feel the subtle shift in air pressure that spoke of the building's positive pressure system, designed to prevent eavesdropping devices from being effective beyond the outer walls. The elevator chimed softly at each floor, a two-tone sound that had been chosen specifically for its inability to interfere with electronic equipment. The third floor opened onto a corridor lined with office doors, each marked with number sequences that followed. A logic known only to the security planners who had designed the building's layout. Some doors were open, revealing glimpses of workspaces filled with multiple computer monitors, stacks of classified documents in red folders, and a kind of organized chaos that came from analysts working on problems that had no clear solutions. Other doors remained closed, their small windows covered by privacy screens that prevented casual observation of whatever work was happening inside. Mylene's assigned workspace was located in room 312, a mid-sized office that she shared with 3 other analysts in the Regional Threat Assessment Unit. The room had 2 windows facing north, offering a view of the training grounds and the distant tree line that marked the boundary of the installation. The glass was treated with a film that prevented electronic surveillance from outside, while still allowing natural light to supplement the overhead fluorescence. Her desk was positioned in the corner furthest from the door, a location that gave her clear sight lines to both the windows and the entrance, while keeping her computer screens angled away from casual observation. The desk itself was a study in controlled organization. 3 monitors arranged in a gentle arc provided workspace for multiple classification levels, each connected to separate computer systems that never shared data without explicit authorization. A document scanner with built-in encryption capabilities sat to her left, its input tray empty and its status lights showing green across the board. File folders were arranged in precise stacks, each marked with color-coded classification tags that indicated both the level of sensitivity and the geographic region of focus. A coffee mug bearing the faded logo of her alma mater, Georgetown University, sat on a small coaster that protected the desk's surface from water rings. Personal items were kept to a minimum in accordance with both security regulations and Mylene's own preference for simplicity. A small framed photograph showed her parents standing in front of their farm in rural Ohio, the image slightly faded from age but still clear enough to show the quiet pride in their faces. A mechanical pencil and a red pen rested in a small holder made from recycled aluminum, their placement suggesting frequent use. A small succulent plant in a white ceramic pot provided the only splash of color in the otherwise neutral workspace, its thick leaves storing water with the same efficiency that Mylene stored information. The morning briefing materials had already been distributed, appearing in her secure inbox while she was making her way through the rain from the parking lot. Regional intelligence summaries from overnight operations, satellite imagery analysis reports, and communication intercept summaries formed the foundation of each day's work. She opened the files with practiced efficiency, her eyes scanning for patterns and anomalies that might indicate changes in threat levels or operational activities in her assigned areas of focus. Her colleagues were beginning to arrive, their conversations carrying across the open workspace in fragments of technical jargon and casual complaints about the weather. Agent Marcus Webb, whose desk faced hers from across the room, was already deep in a phone conversation with someone at the Pentagon, his voice carrying the kind of confidence that came from knowing his recommendations would be taken seriously. Agent Sarah Chun had claimed the desk nearest the windows, her workspace decorated with enough personal items to suggest someone who intended to stay in this assignment for the long term. Agent David Rodriguez occupied the remaining desk, his area distinguished by the 3 computer monitors that seemed to constantly display different news feeds from around the world. The dynamic between the 4 analysts had settled into a comfortable routine over the months they had worked together. Webb took the lead on briefings and coordination with other agencies, his background in military intelligence giving him the credibility that opened doors and secured resources. Chun specialized in technical analysis, her expertise in signals, intelligence and electronic communications, making her the go-to person for anything involving intercepted data. Rodriguez served as their connection to current events and media analysis. His ability to spot emerging trends and open-source information, often providing early warning of developing situations. Mylene's role was less clearly defined, which suited her perfectly. She was officially designated as a regional analyst specializing in Eastern European threats, but in practice, she served as the unit's problem solver for anything that didn't fit neatly into established categories. When satellite imagery showed unusual activity that couldn't be explained by known operations, Mylene would spend days piecing together the context from historical patterns and indirect indicators. When communication intercepts contained references that other analysts couldn't decode, Mylene would research the cultural and linguistic background until the meaning became clear. When operational reports contained inconsistencies that suggested either deception or misunderstanding, Mylene would trace the information back to its sources until the truth emerged. This work required a different kind of intelligence than the rapid-fire analysis that dominated most of their daily activities. It demanded patience, the ability to hold multiple contradictory possibilities in mind simultaneously, and the willingness to pursue connections that might not become relevant until weeks or months later. It was work that happened in the spaces between urgent deadlines, in the quiet hours when phones weren't ringing and briefings weren't being demanded. It was work that often went unnoticed until its absence would have created significant problems. The rain continued to fall outside the windows, the sound providing a steady backdrop to the morning's activities. Somewhere in the building, a meeting was beginning that would shape operational priorities for the coming week. Somewhere else, urgent communications were arriving that would require immediate analysis and response. The machinery of intelligence gathering and analysis continued its steady operation, processing information from dozens of sources into actionable intelligence that would inform decisions made in Washington and at command centers around the world. Mylene opened her first file of the day, a collection of satellite images showing infrastructure changes in a region that had been quiet for months. The images were date-stamped over a 6-week period, showing the gradual construction of what appeared to be a communications facility in an area previously used only for agriculture. Other analysts had noted the construction but classified it as routine infrastructure development, the kind of modernization project that was happening across the region as part of economic development initiatives. Something about the pattern bothered her, though she couldn't immediately articulate what it was. The facility's location was unusual, positioned in a valley that would limit its communications range, rather than on high ground that would maximize coverage. The access road followed an indirect route that would make construction more difficult and expensive than necessary. The timing of the construction coincided with a period when the region's government had been publicly announcing budget cuts for infrastructure projects. She began pulling additional files, searching for context that might explain the inconsistencies. Historical imagery going back 2 years, economic reports on the region's development priorities, political analysis of the current government's infrastructure policies. Each piece of information was routine in isolation, but together they were beginning to form a picture that didn't match the official explanation for the construction project. This was the kind of work that Mylene found most satisfying. The slow accumulation of details that gradually revealed patterns invisible to those looking for immediate answers. It required the ability to see significance in apparently mundane information, to recognize when something that appeared normal was actually carefully constructed to appear that way. It was work that happened in silence, without fanfare, often without immediate recognition of its importance. Outside, the rain showed no signs of stopping, and the gray sky suggested it would continue well into the evening. The day was settling into its rhythm, the familiar cycle of analysis and reporting that would continue until the building closed, and preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The skeleton crew took over for the night shift. In a few hours, the morning's discoveries would be compiled into reports that would join the steady stream of intelligence flowing toward decision makers, who would weigh their significance against dozens of other priorities. For now, though, there was only the quiet work of understanding, the patient process of transforming scattered information into knowledge that might, eventually, prove vital to someone's safety. The weekly intelligence briefing took place in Conference Room A, a windowless space on the second floor designed specifically for classified discussions. The walls were lined with sound-dampening material disguised as decorative panels, and the single entrance was equipped with electronic countermeasures that would detect any unauthorized recording devices. 24 chairs surrounded an oval table made from polished oak, each position equipped with a secure tablet interface and a small microphone that could be activated for questions or comments. At the head of the room, 3 large monitors displayed classified briefing materials, their screens angled to prevent observation from the corridor outside. Colonel Patricia Hawkins commanded the room with the kind of authority that came from 2 decades of intelligence work across 3 different continents. Her silver hair was cut in a style that projected competence without drawing attention, and her uniform bore the ribbon rack of someone who had served in places where intelligence work carried immediate life or death consequences. She moved through the briefing materials with practiced efficiency, her laser pointer highlighting key points on satellite imagery and intercepted communications, while her voice maintained the measured cadence of someone accustomed to delivering information that would shape operational decisions. The attendees represented the cream of Fort Harrison's analytical talent, drawn from different specialties, but united by their reputation for producing actionable intelligence under pressure. Major Thompson from the Counterintelligence Division sat near the front, his attention focused on anything that might indicate hostile intelligence operations against American interests. Captain Martinez from the Signal Intelligence Unit had claimed a position where she could see both the screens and the faces of other attendees, her experience in electronic warfare making her sensitive to both technical details and human reactions. Lieutenant Commander Brooks from the Naval Intelligence Liaison maintained the kind of alert posture that suggested someone ready to contribute insights from a maritime perspective. Mylene occupied a chair in the middle row, her notebook open to a fresh page and her pen ready to capture details that might not make it into the official summary. She had learned early in her career that the most valuable intelligence often emerged from the connections between different briefing items, rather than from any single piece of information. Her position in the room was deliberate, chosen to provide clear sight lines to both the presentation screens and the reactions of colleagues, whose expertise might offer clues about the significance of particular intelligence items. The morning's briefing focused on emerging threats in Eastern Europe, a region that had been experiencing increased military activity and political instability over the past 6 months. Colonel Hawkins presented satellite imagery showing troop movements near contested borders, communication intercepts indicating coordination between previously unrelated militant groups, and economic intelligence suggesting the redirection of resources toward military objectives. Each piece of information was significant in isolation, but together they painted a picture of preparation for activities that could destabilize the entire region. Agent Marcus Webb, seated 2 chairs to Mylene's left, had been taking extensive notes throughout the presentation, his handwriting quick and decisive as he captured details that aligned with his own analytical framework. When Colonel Hawkins opened the floor for questions and analysis, Webb was the first to raise his hand, his voice carrying across the room with confidence that immediately drew attention. "Colonel, based on the patterns we're seeing in the satellite imagery and the communication intercepts, I believe we're looking at a coordinated preparation for a major offensive operation," Webb said, his laser pointer highlighting specific elements on the displayed map. "The timeline suggests they're approximately 2 weeks away from being ready to execute, which gives us a narrow window for preventive action." His analysis was thorough and well-reasoned, backed by references to historical precedents and comparative intelligence from similar situations in other regions. Several other attendees nodded in agreement, their expression suggesting that Webb had articulated conclusions they had been forming independently. Colonel Hawkins made notes on her tablet, her body language indicating that she was taking his assessment seriously as a foundation for operational planning. Captain Martinez offered technical details that supported Webb's timeline, her expertise in signal intelligence providing confirmation of increased coordination activities and resource positioning. Major Thompson added counterintelligence perspectives that suggested the observed activities were likely genuine preparations rather than deception operations designed to mislead American intelligence. The discussion built momentum as different specialists contributed their expertise to an emerging consensus about the threat level and appropriate response options. When the formal presentations concluded and Colonel Hawkins invited additional observations, Mylene raised her hand with the same quiet gesture she used for most interactions. The room's attention shifted to her with the kind of polite patience typically accorded to junior personnel who might have useful details to contribute, but were unlikely to challenge the main conclusions reached by more senior analysts. "Colonel, I've been analyzing some infrastructure developments in the same region that might be relevant to the timeline discussion," Mylene said, her voice carrying clearly despite its soft tone. "There's been construction activity that doesn't align with the economic development explanations provided by local governments, and the timing suggests it might be connected to the military preparations we've been discussing." She activated her tablet interface, bringing up satellite imagery that she had been studying for the past several days. The images showed the communications facility that had initially caught her attention, along with additional sites that exhibited similar patterns of unusual construction timing and location choices. Her analysis had revealed a network of facilities positioned to provide secure communications and logistics support for exactly the kind of large-scale military operation that Webb had described. The interesting thing is that these facilities appear designed for operations extending beyond the 2-week timeline we've been discussing, Mylene continued, highlighting specific features in the imagery. The infrastructure investments suggest planning for sustained activities over several months, which might indicate that the immediate military preparations are just the first phase of a longer-term strategy. The room's response was immediate and telling. Webb's expression shifted from polite attention to visible skepticism, his eyebrows rising in the way that suggested he was hearing conclusions that didn't match his own analytical framework. Captain Martinez glanced at her own notes, then back at Mylene's presentation, her technical expertise apparently not finding support for the extended timeline assessment. Major Thompson's reaction was more subtle but equally dismissive, a slight shake of his head that indicated disagreement with conclusions that seemed to contradict the established intelligence consensus. Colonel Hawkins studied the imagery with professional attention, but her body language suggested someone evaluating information that might be interesting, but was unlikely to change operational priorities. When she spoke, her tone carried the kind of diplomatic patience used for correcting subordinates without causing public embarrassment. "Agent Carter, I appreciate your attention to infrastructure details, but we need to focus our analysis on immediate threats rather than speculative long-term scenarios," the colonel said, her laser pointer returning to the original satellite imagery that had formed the foundation for Webb's assessment. "The intelligence we've reviewed this morning points clearly toward preparations for near-term action, and our recommendations need to address that reality." Webb seized the opening to reinforce the established consensus, his voice carrying a Note of educational authority that suggested someone explaining obvious facts to a colleague who had missed the point. Mylene, I think you're reading too much into routine infrastructure development, he said, his smile taking on the condescending quality that often accompanied interactions between senior and junior personnel. These construction projects could be explained by a dozen different factors that have nothing to do with military planning. We have to be careful not to see patterns where they don't actually exist. Captain Martinez nodded in agreement, her technical expertise lending weight to the dismissal of Mylene's analysis. The signal intelligence we've collected focuses specifically on short-term coordination activities, she added, her tone suggesting that technical data should take precedence over infrastructure speculation. When we have direct evidence of immediate planning, we shouldn't be distracted by circumstantial observations about construction projects. Major Thompson's contribution carried the weight of counterintelligence experience his perspective offered, with the authority of someone accustomed to distinguishing between genuine threats and analytical distractions. Agent Carter, in my experience, analysts who are new to regional threat assessment often overestimate the significance of infrastructure developments, he said, his words delivered with the kind of professional courtesy that somehow made them more cutting than direct. Criticism would have been. It's a common mistake, but one that can lead to resource waste if we're not careful about maintaining analytical discipline. The dismissal was thorough and professional, executed with the kind of collaborative courtesy that made dissent seem unreasonable rather than suppressing it through direct authority. Mylene found herself isolated not through dramatic confrontation, but through the subtle process of expert consensus forming around conclusions that excluded her perspective. Her analysis was acknowledged, noted, and filed away as the work of someone whose attention to detail was admirable, but whose analytical judgment required guidance from more experienced colleagues. Colonel Hawkins moved the briefing toward operational recommendations, her focus shifting to the practical question of how intelligence assessments should inform military and diplomatic responses. The discussion that followed built on Webb's 2-week timeline and the supporting analysis provided by Martinez and Thompson, creating a framework for action that treated Mylene's extended timeline concerns as an interesting but ultimately irrelevant sidebar to the main threat assessment. The meeting concluded with assignment of follow-up research tasks and coordination responsibilities that reflected the established hierarchy of analytical expertise. Webb was tasked with leading a deeper assessment of military preparations and timeline refinement. Martinez received responsibility for expanded signal intelligence collection to confirm coordination activities. Thompson would focus on counterintelligence measures to protect American interests during the anticipated 2-week preparation period. Mylene was assigned to continue monitoring infrastructure developments, a task that was described as valuable background research but was clearly positioned as supporting work rather than primary analysis. The assignment was delivered with encouragement about the importance of comprehensive intelligence gathering. But the subtext was unmistakable. Her role was to provide details that might support conclusions reached by others rather than to develop independent analytical assessments that might challenge established frameworks. As the briefing attendees filed out of the conference room, their conversations continued in small groups that naturally excluded Mylene from their analytical discussions. Webb, Martinez, and Thompson formed a cluster near the exit, their voices carrying fragments of technical discussion about coordination timelines and resource requirements. Other senior analysts joined similar conversations, their body language suggesting the kind of collegial problem-solving that emerged when experts shared common understanding of complex challenges. Mylene gathered her materials with the same quiet efficiency she brought to every task, her notebook containing detailed observations about both the intelligence presentations and the group dynamics that had shaped their reception. She had learned long ago that understanding how information was processed within Organizational structures was often as important as understanding the information itself. The briefing had revealed not just intelligence about external threats, but also patterns of internal decision-making that would influence how those threats were addressed. Walking back toward the elevator, she passed colleagues whose conversations touched on weekend plans and administrative challenges with the casual ease of people comfortable with their position in the organizational hierarchy. The rain outside had intensified, its sound against the windows providing a backdrop to discussions about lunch plans and follow-up meetings. The building's steady hum of activity continued around her. The machinery of intelligence analysis, processing the morning's information into reports and recommendations that would influence decisions, made far from Fort Harrison. The elevator carried her back to the third floor, where the familiar environment of room 312 waited with its 3 monitors and organized workspace. Her colleagues would return shortly, their conversations likely to continue the themes established in the briefing room. Webb would begin developing his expanded timeline analysis with the confidence of someone whose expertise had been validated by institutional consensus. Martinez would coordinate with technical specialists to expand signal intelligence collection activities. Thompson would implement counterintelligence measures designed to protect operations, planned around the 2-week preparation timeline. Mylene would return to her infrastructure analysis, her assignment framed as background research but carrying the unspoken understanding that her conclusion should support rather than challenge the analytical framework established by more senior colleagues. It was a familiar position, one that she had occupied throughout her career at Fort Harrison. Her work was valued for its attention to detail and thoroughness, but her judgment was consistently subordinated to the expertise of analysts whose confidence in their conclusions matched their seniority in the organizational hierarchy. The rain continued against the windows, and somewhere in the distance, the problems she had identified in her satellite imagery analysis continued to develop according to timelines that extended well beyond the 2-week window that had become the foundation for operational planning. Whether those problems would eventually validate her concerns or prove irrelevant to the immediate threats facing American interests remained to be seen. For now, there was only the quiet work of continued analysis and the patient accumulation of evidence that might eventually speak for itself. The Secure Communications Center at Fort Harrison operated around the clock, its banks of monitors displaying encrypted data streams from intelligence assets across 3 continents. The facility occupied the entire basement level of Building C, its walls lined with copper mesh that prevented electromagnetic signals from entering or leaving without authorization. The air carried the constant hum of cooling systems working to manage the heat generated by dozens of high-powered computers processing classified information in real time. Red lighting provided illumination during night shifts, preserving the operator's night vision while they monitored communication networks that connected Fort Harrison to intelligence operations around the world. Lieutenant Sarah Kim had been working the overnight shift for 6 months, her expertise in encrypted communications making her invaluable for managing the complex data streams that flowed through the center during the hours when overseas operations were most active. Her workstation consisted of 4 large monitors arranged in a semicircle, each displaying different categories of incoming intelligence. Satellite communications occupied the left screen, showing encrypted messages from field operatives and allied intelligence services. Signal intercepts filled the center monitors, displaying automated translations of communications captured by listening posts and electronic surveillance systems. The right screen tracked administrative communications, routine status reports, and coordination messages that maintained the steady flow of information between intelligence centers. At 3:47 a.m., a priority message arrived through one of the satellite communication channels, its encryption headers indicating origin from a deep cover operative working in the same Eastern European region that had been the focus of the previous day's intelligence briefing. Lieutenant Kim's training had taught her to recognize the different priority levels used by field operatives, and this message carried the kind of urgent classification that indicated immediate threat to either the operative's safety or the success of their mission. She opened the message using her secure access codes, her screen filling with text that had been composed under conditions of extreme operational pressure. The operative, identified only by the code designation Blackbird 7, reported the discovery of a training facility that had not appeared in any previous intelligence assessments. The facility was located in a mountainous region approximately 40 kilometers from the nearest population center, accessible only by a single road that wound through terrain that would make casual observation nearly impossible. Blackbird 7 had stumbled upon the location while conducting routine surveillance of military supply movements, following a convoy that had deviated from its expected route to make an unscheduled stop at coordinates that supposedly contained only wilderness and abandoned mining infrastructure. What the operative had discovered challenged every assumption that had guided the previous day's threat assessment. The facility was far more extensive than the satellite imagery had suggested, with most of its structures built underground or camouflaged to prevent detection from aerial surveillance. The surface buildings that were visible appeared to be agricultural storage facilities, but Blackbird 7 had observed personnel moving between these structures in patterns that suggested military training rather than farming activities. Vehicle movements followed tactical protocols, with drivers maintaining communication discipline and following routes designed to minimize exposure to observation. More significantly, the operative had identified training activities that indicated preparation for operations far more complex than the regional military actions that Webb and his colleagues had predicted. Personnel were practicing infiltration techniques designed for urban environments, with mock-ups of building layouts that resembled government facilities and transportation infrastructure. Communications equipment was being tested for operations in electromagnetically contested environments, suggesting preparation for missions where normal military communications would be jammed or compromised. Supply movements included specialized equipment designed for extended operations without logistical support, indicating planning for missions that would last weeks rather than days. Lieutenant Kim read through the report twice, her experience in communications intelligence helping her recognize the significance of details that might escape analysts focused on broader strategic patterns. Blackbird 7's observations about communication protocols and equipment testing aligned with intelligence indicators that suggested preparation for sophisticated infiltration operations rather than conventional military actions. The timeline mentioned in the report extended far beyond the 2-week window that had been established as the foundation for current threat assessments, with evidence suggesting that the training facility had been operating for at least 3 months without detection. Operational security implications were staggering. If Blackbird 7's assessment was accurate, American intelligence had completely missed a major training operation that was preparing personnel for missions that could target critical infrastructure or government facilities across multiple countries. The facility's location and camouflage suggested a level of operational sophistication that indicated state-level sponsorship, but the training activities pointed toward objectives that extended beyond conventional military goals. This was preparation for the kind of asymmetric warfare that could destabilize entire regions without triggering the diplomatic responses associated with traditional military aggression. Lieutenant Kim's protocols required immediate notification of the Intelligence Analysis Division whenever field reports contained information that contradicted established threat assessments. She composed a priority message for Colonel Hawkins, summarizing Blackbird 7's findings and highlighting the discrepancies with current analytical frameworks. The message was encrypted using protocols that would ensure its immediate delivery to Colonel Hawkins' secure communication system, triggering alerts that would wake her regardless of the hour if she was not already at her desk. within 20 minutes. Lieutenant Kim's communication panel indicated that Colonel Hawkins was online and requesting immediate access to the full Blackbird 7 report. The colonel's response came through encrypted channels, her text carrying the kind of controlled urgency that indicated someone recognizing the potential significance of unexpected intelligence. She requested verification of Blackbird 7's current operational status and confirmation that the operative remained in position to provide additional intelligence about the training facility. The verification process revealed additional complications that deepened the mystery surrounding the training facility. Blackbird 7 reported that the facility's security had been enhanced significantly within the past week, with additional personnel deployed to patrol the perimeter and new electronic countermeasures installed to detect unauthorized surveillance. The operative's ability to maintain observation was being compromised by security improvements that suggested the facility's operators were aware that their activities might have attracted attention from intelligence services. More troubling was Blackbird 7's assessment that the training activities were accelerating according to a timeline that indicated imminent deployment rather than continued preparation. Personnel who had been practicing infiltration techniques were now conducting full-scale rehearsals using equipment and procedures that suggested operational readiness. Vehicle movements had shifted from training patterns to deployment configurations, with supplies being loaded according to protocols designed for actual missions rather than exercises. The facility was transitioning from a training environment to a staging area for operations that could begin within days, rather than weeks. Colonel Hawkins' response was immediate and decisive. She activated emergency protocols that brought key intelligence personnel to Fort Harrison, regardless of the hour. Their expertise needed to assess intelligence that could reshape understanding of threats that had seemed manageable just hours before. The Secure Communications Center became the coordination hub for an urgent intelligence review, its red-lit environment hosting discussions that would determine how American intelligence responded to evidence that contradicted months of analytical work. Major Thompson arrived first. His counterintelligence expertise needed to assess whether Blackbird 7's report might represent a deception operation designed to mislead American analysis. Captain Martinez followed, her signal intelligence background essential for evaluating the communication and electronic warfare implications of the training facility. Agent Webb was summoned from his off-base residence. His regional expertise needed to integrate the new intelligence with existing threat assessments. The atmosphere in the communication center carried a tension that was different from the routine urgency of daily intelligence operations. This was the kind of situation that intelligence professionals trained for but hoped never to encounter. The discovery that fundamental assumptions about enemy capabilities and intentions were potentially incorrect, with implications that could affect operational planning across multiple theaters. Red lighting cast long shadows across workstations where analysts worked to verify and contextualize intelligence that challenged everything they thought they understood about the regional threat environment. Mylene arrived at Fort Harrison 45 minutes after receiving her emergency recall notification. Her drive through empty pre-dawn streets, providing time to consider the implications of being summoned for urgent intelligence analysis. Her assignment to infrastructure monitoring had positioned her outside the mainstream of operational planning, but emergency recalls typically meant that every available analytical resource was needed to address developments that exceeded normal processing capabilities. She entered Building C through the emergency access protocols, her security clearance providing entry to areas that were normally restricted during off hours. The elevator to the basement communications center required additional security verification. Her access codes confirmed by personnel who were clearly operating under heightened security protocols. When the doors opened, she found herself in an environment transformed by crisis response procedures. Additional workstations had been activated. their screens displaying intelligence feeds that were normally distributed only to senior command personnel. Communications equipment that remained dormant during routine operations was now active, its displays showing coordination activities with intelligence centers across the Atlantic. Colonel Hawkins stood at the center of the activity, her attention focused on multiple information streams while she coordinated analysis activities that were clearly exceeding normal procedural boundaries. Webb, Martinez, and Thompson occupied workstations arranged in a semicircle around the main display screens, their expertise being applied to intelligence that was arriving faster than it could be processed through normal channels. Additional personnel were arriving as emergency recalls brought specialists from across the installation to address whatever crisis had triggered the overnight activation. Mylene was directed to a workstation equipped with access to the satellite imagery databases that formed the foundation of her infrastructure analysis work. Her assignment was to conduct an immediate review of all available imagery covering the Undetected region where Blackbird 7 had discovered the training facility, searching for details that might have been overlooked during routine analysis. The timeline for her work was measured in hours rather than days, with results needed to support operational decisions that could not wait for normal analytical procedures. As she began accessing the imagery databases, fragments of conversations from nearby workstations provided context for the urgency driving the overnight activation. Blackbird 7's report had identified capabilities and intentions that contradicted fundamental assumptions about enemy planning, with implications that extended far beyond the regional threat assessment that had been the focus of recent briefings. The training facility represented a level of operational sophistication that suggested preparation for missions that could target critical infrastructure across multiple countries, with timelines that indicated deployment might be imminent. Satellite imagery that had seemed routine during her previous analysis now took on new significance when viewed through the framework provided by Blackbird 7's observations. Details that had appeared to be normal construction activity could now be interpreted as camouflage for military infrastructure. Transportation patterns that had seemed consistent with economic development might actually represent supply movements designed to support extended operations. The infrastructure development that she had identified as inconsistent with official explanations now appeared to be part of a comprehensive preparation for missions that exceeded anything contemplated by current threat assessments. Working through the night, surrounded by colleagues whose expertise was being applied to intelligence that challenged months of analytical work, Mylene began to recognize patterns in the satellite imagery that aligned with Blackbird 7's field observations. The training facility was not an isolated development, but part of a network of sites that had been developing according to a coordinated plan that extended across several countries. Each site had been designed to appear routine when viewed individually, but together they formed an infrastructure capable of supporting the kind of sophisticated operations that Blackbird 7 had observed in training. The scope of what was emerging from the overnight analysis was staggering in its implications for regional security and American interests. Intelligence that had seemed manageable within established frameworks was revealing itself to be preparation for operations that could reshape the strategic balance across multiple theaters. The 2-week timeline that had guided recent planning was proving inadequate for threats that were already approaching operational readiness. The quiet infrastructure development that Mylene had identified during her routine analysis was revealing itself to be the foundation for capabilities that exceeded anything anticipated by CONVENTIONL threat assessment. Dawn was approaching outside Building C. But the basement communication center remained locked in its artificial environment where red lighting and the steady hum of electronic equipment provided the backdrop for analysis that would determine how American intelligence responded to discoveries that challenged fundamental assumptions about enemy capabilities and intentions. The basement communications center had transformed into a nerve center of controlled chaos as dawn broke over Fort Harrison. Additional workstations hummed with activity, while encrypted communications flowed between intelligence centers across 2 continents. The red emergency lighting had been replaced by standard fluorescence as analysts worked through databases that normally required days of processing time. Coffee cups accumulated on desk surfaces while personnel who had been summoned from their homes worked through intelligence that was rewriting fundamental assumptions about regional threats. Mylene sat surrounded by 6 monitors displaying satellite imagery from different time periods, her analysis software running pattern recognition algorithms that compared current infrastructure development with historical baselines, dating back 18 months. The overnight work had revealed connections between seemingly unrelated construction projects across 4 different countries, each site positioned to support the kind of sophisticated operations that Blackbird 7 had observed at the training facility. What had appeared to be routine economic development was revealing itself as carefully coordinated preparation for missions that could destabilize multiple governments simultaneously. Her workstation occupied a corner position that provided clear sight lines to the main coordination area where Colonel Hawkins was managing information flow between field operatives, satellite surveillance systems, and allied intelligence services. Webb, Martinez, and Thompson had been working through the night to verify Blackbird 7's intelligence and assess its implications for current threat assessments. Their expertise was being applied to intelligence that exceeded the scope of anything they had previously encountered, forcing them to adapt analytical frameworks designed for conventional threats to capabilities that represented entirely new categories of operational sophistication. The breakthrough came when Mylene's pattern recognition software identified a transportation network that connected all of the infrastructure sites she had been monitoring. Vehicle movements that had appeared random when viewed individually were revealing themselves as coordinated logistics operations designed to move personnel and equipment between training facilities and staging areas. The timing of these movements aligned precisely with Blackbird 7's observations about accelerated training activities, indicating that the network was transitioning from preparation to operational deployment. More significantly, the transportation analysis revealed movement patterns that suggested infiltration teams were being positioned for missions, targeting specific facilities across multiple countries. Each team's positioning corresponded to critical infrastructure points that would maximize disruption if compromised simultaneously. Power distribution centers, communication hubs, transportation nodes, and government facilities were being targeted according to a coordinated plan that would create cascading failures across entire regions if executed successfully. Mylene studied the movement patterns with growing recognition of their strategic sophistication. The positioning was too precise to represent conventional military planning and too coordinated to represent independent terrorist operations. This was state-level strategic planning executed through asymmetric warfare capabilities that could achieve political objectives without triggering the diplomatic responses associated with traditional military aggression. The infrastructure network she had been monitoring was designed to support missions that would reshape regional power structures while maintaining plausible deniability for the sponsoring government. She began cross-referencing the movement patterns with intelligence databases that tracked personnel associated with specialized military units and intelligence services. The results confirmed her growing suspicions about the operational sophistication behind the infrastructure development. Personnel moving through the transportation network included individuals with backgrounds in special operations, intelligence gathering, and technical specialties that would be essential for missions targeting critical infrastructure. These were not conventional military units, but carefully selected teams trained for operations that required extended autonomy and sophisticated technical capabilities. The timeline analysis revealed the most disturbing aspect of the emerging threat. Movement patterns indicated that infiltration teams were already in position near their target facilities, with final positioning completed within the past 72 hours. The operational timeline was not weeks or even days but hours, with evidence suggesting that coordinated attacks could begin at any moment. The 2-week preparation window that had guided recent planning was proving to be a catastrophic misassessment of threats that were already approaching the execution phase. Mylene's analysis was interrupted by urgent communications from Blackbird 7, whose continued surveillance of the training facility was providing real-time intelligence about activities that confirmed the worst implications of her infrastructure assessment. The operative reported that the facility had been largely evacuated during the overnight hours, with personnel and equipment moved according to protocols designed for operational deployment rather than relocation. Vehicle convoys had departed the facility following routes that led toward populated areas where critical infrastructure would provide high-value targets for coordinated attacks. The convergence of her infrastructure analysis with Blackbird 7's field intelligence created a comprehensive picture of threats that exceeded anything contemplated by existing contingency plans. The enemy's operational capabilities included not just the ability to conduct coordinated attacks against critical infrastructure, but also the intelligence gathering and planning sophistication needed to position teams for maximum strategic impact. This was preparation for attacks that could cripple government and economic functions across multiple countries, while maintaining operational security that had prevented detection until the final preparation phases. Colonel Hawkins had been monitoring Mylene's analysis while coordinating response activities with other intelligence centers, her experience recognizing the significance of pattern recognition that connected field intelligence with infrastructure assessment. When Mylene's transportation analysis revealed the positioning of infiltration teams, the colonel abandoned her coordination activities to focus directly on implications that could reshape understanding of immediate threats to American interests and allied governments. Agent Carter, I need your assessment of target priorities based on the positioning patterns you've identified, Colonel Hawkins said, her voice carrying the kind of controlled urgency that indicated decisions with life or death consequences. If these teams are positioned for coordinated attacks, we need to understand which facilities represent the highest priority targets and what kind of strategic objectives they're designed to achieve. Mylene's response drew on months of infrastructure analysis that had been dismissed as background research, but was now proving essential for understanding enemy capabilities and intentions. Her assessment identified 3 categories of targets that would achieve maximum strategic impact if compromised simultaneously. Primary targets included power distribution facilities, whose destruction would create cascading failures across regional electrical grids. Secondary targets focused on communication infrastructure that would prevent coordinated response to the initial attacks. Tertiary targets included transportation nodes and government facilities, whose compromise would create political chaos while preventing effective crisis management. The strategic sophistication of the target selection revealed planning that extended far beyond terrorism or conventional military objectives. This was preparation for attacks designed to create systemic failures that would force governments to focus on domestic crisis management while preventing coordinated international responses. The enemy's goal was not destruction for its own sake, but the creation of political and economic chaos that would provide opportunities for advancing strategic objectives through diplomatic and economic pressure, applied while target governments struggled with internal crisis management. Webb, Martinez, and Thompson had been following Mylene's analysis while working to verify intelligence that challenged every assumption that had guided their recent threat assessments. Their expertise was being applied to confirm details that revealed operational capabilities far exceeding anything they had anticipated. The professional dismissal that had characterized their response to her briefing room analysis was being replaced by recognition that her infrastructure focus had identified threats that their conventional analytical frameworks had missed entirely. "Mylene, how certain are you about the operational timeline?" Webb asked, his earlier confidence replaced by the kind of professional concern that indicated someone recognizing the implications of intelligence that exceeded his expertise. "If these teams are positioned for coordinated attacks, we need to understand how much time we have to develop response options." Her timeline analysis was based on movement patterns that indicated final positioning had been completed within the past 72 hours, combined with Blackbird 7's observations about facility evacuation and equipment deployment. The convergence of these indicators pointed toward operational readiness that could translate into coordinated attacks, beginning within hours rather than days. The enemy's operational security suggested they were aware that their activities might have attracted intelligence attention, creating pressure to execute missions before countermeasures could be implemented. Based on the movement patterns and field intelligence, I believe we're looking at a window of 6 to 12 hours before coordinated attacks could begin, Mylene said, her voice steady despite the implications of an assessment that would determine how intelligence services across multiple countries responded to immediate threats. "The positioning is complete, the logistic support is in place, and the operational security suggests they're prepared to execute, regardless of whether their preparations have been detected." The assessment sent a wave of controlled urgency through the communications center as analysts and coordination personnel recognized that they were facing threats that required immediate operational response rather than continued intelligence gathering. Colonel Hawkins activated emergency protocols that would alert government and military leadership across multiple countries to threats that could begin materializing within hours. The basement facility became the coordination hub for international intelligence cooperation focused on preventing attacks that could destabilize entire regions. Captain Martinez's signal intelligence expertise was immediately applied to intercepting communications that might provide additional warning about attack timing or target priorities. Her equipment was reconfigured to monitor frequency ranges and encryption protocols that might be used by infiltration teams, maintaining final coordination before executing their missions. The technical sophistication required for monitoring these communications matched the operational sophistication that had characterized every aspect of the enemy's preparation. Major Thompson's counterintelligence background became essential for assessing whether American intelligence had been compromised during the enemy's preparation phases. The operational security that had prevented detection of such extensive preparation suggested intelligence gathering capabilities that might have penetrated American analysis and planning activities. His assessment would determine whether response planning could proceed according to standard protocols or required enhanced security measures to prevent enemy adaptation to American countermeasures. The transformation in how Mylene's analysis was being received represented more than professional recognition of expertise that had been previously overlooked. Her infrastructure focus and pattern recognition capabilities were proving essential for understanding threats that conventional analytical frameworks had been unable to detect. The quiet persistence that had characterized her approach to seemingly routine monitoring activities was revealing itself as exactly the kind of analytical discipline needed for threats that were designed to remain invisible until execution. Colonel Hawkins' coordination activities expanded to include direct communication with allied intelligence services whose governments faced immediate threats from infiltration teams that were already in position near critical infrastructure. The information sharing required careful balance between providing sufficient warning to enable effective countermeasures while maintaining operational security that would prevent enemy adaptation to intelligence discoveries. The basement communications center became the focal point for international cooperation focused on preventing coordinated attacks that could reshape regional security. As morning progressed, additional intelligence arrived that confirmed the most troubling aspects of Mylene's assessment, while revealing additional complexities that exceeded initial threat estimates. Blackbird 7 reported surveillance indicating that infiltration teams were equipped with technical capabilities that would enable them to maintain operations, even if initial attacks were detected and responded to quickly. This was preparation for sustained operations rather than single-strike missions, with implications that extended the potential impact far beyond immediate infrastructure damage. The scope of what was emerging from the overnight analysis represented a fundamental challenge to assumptions about enemy capabilities and the effectiveness of existing intelligence-gathering methods. Threats that had seemed manageable within established analytical frameworks were revealing themselves as preparation for operations that could achieve strategic objectives without direct military confrontation. The 2-week timeline that had guided recent planning was proving inadequate for threats that were already approaching execution, while the infrastructure focus that had been dismissed as background research was providing the only reliable foundation for understanding enemy capabilities and intentions. In the growing light of dawn outside Building C, the Communications Center continued its coordination of international intelligence. Cooperation focused on preventing attacks that could begin within hours. The quiet analyst whose infrastructure monitoring had been treated as routine background work was now providing assessments that would determine how multiple governments responded to immediate threats to their critical infrastructure and political stability. The recognition was complete, but the most challenging phase of response was just beginning. The secure briefing room, adjacent to the Communications Center, had been hastily converted into an operational planning facility as the scope of the immediate threat became clear. Digital maps covered every available wall surface, displaying the locations of infiltration teams, critical infrastructure targets, and potential response corridors in real-time updates that reflected the most current intelligence assessments. Communication equipment, normally reserved for coordinating major military operations, had been activated to manage information flow between Fort Harrison and command centers across 3 continents. The air carried the tension of professionals working against a timeline, measured in hours rather than days. Colonel Hawkins stood at the center of coordinated chaos, her attention divided between incoming intelligence updates and operational planning. Sessions that were developing response options under extreme time constraints. Ali intelligence services were providing confirmation of Mylene's target assessments while simultaneously requesting American support for countermeasures that exceeded their individual capabilities. The coordination required balancing operational security concerns with the need for rapid information sharing that could prevent attacks designed to destabilize multiple governments. Simultaneously, Mylene occupied a workstation positioned to provide oversight of the entire operational planning process while maintaining access to the intelligence databases that had become essential for understanding enemy capabilities and positioning. Her infrastructure analysis continued to provide real-time updates about movement, patterns, and logistics activities that indicated final preparations for coordinated attacks. Each new piece of information confirmed the sophistication of planning that had positioned infiltration teams for maximum strategic impact while maintaining operational security that had prevented detection until the final hours. The challenge facing operational planners was unprecedented in its complexity and scope. Traditional countermeasures designed for conventional threats were inadequate for addressing infiltration teams that had already achieved positioning near critical infrastructure. Military responses that might be effective against identified enemy forces were inappropriate for threats that had been designed to remain invisible until execution. The enemy's operational security meant that direct confrontation would likely trigger immediate execution of attacks that countermeasures were designed to prevent. Webb's expertise in regional threat assessment was being applied to develop profiles of infiltration team capabilities and likely operational procedures, But his analytical framework struggled with threats that exceeded conventional military planning. Martinez's signal intelligence background provided technical insights about communication protocols and electronic warfare capabilities, but her equipment was designed for intercepting communications rather than preventing operations that might not use detectable communication methods. Thompson's counterintelligence experience offered perspectives on operational security and deception, but his expertise was focused on preventing intelligence penetration rather than countering operations that were already in progress. The operational planning sessions revealed a fundamental gap between the sophistication of the threats they were facing and the response capabilities available through conventional channels. Intelligence services were equipped to detect and analyze threats, but preventing coordinated attacks against critical infrastructure required operational capabilities that extended beyond traditional intelligence functions. Military forces could respond to identified threats, but their deployment required time and authorization processes that exceeded the available timeline for preventing imminent attacks. Colonel Hawkins recognized that conventional response options were inadequate for threats that had been specifically designed to exploit the gaps between intelligence detection and operational response. Her coordination with allied services was revealing similar challenges across multiple countries, where intelligence assessments were providing clear pictures of immediate threats, while operational capabilities remained constrained by authorization, procedures, and deployment timelines that assumed longer warning periods. We need operational options that can be implemented immediately without triggering the attacks we're trying to prevent, Colonel Hawkins said, her assessment delivered to the planning team with the kind of directness that indicated recognition of constraints that conventional approaches could not address. These infiltration teams are positioned to execute coordinated attacks the moment they detect large-scale countermeasures. We need responses that can neutralize threats without revealing that we've identified their positioning. The operational challenge was compounded by intelligence indicating that infiltration teams were equipped with communication capabilities that would enable rapid coordination if any single team detected countermeasures being implemented against their position. The enemy's planning had anticipated the possibility of partial detection and included protocols for accelerated execution that would ensure coordinated attacks could proceed even if some teams were compromised. This meant that conventional approaches focusing on neutralizing individual teams could actually trigger the wider attacks that response planning was designed to prevent. Mylene had been following the operational planning discussions while continuing her infrastructure analysis, her focus on pattern recognition providing insights that complemented the tactical expertise being applied by other specialists. Her understanding of the transportation networks and logistics support that enabled infiltration team positioning suggested operational vulnerabilities that might be exploited without triggering the communication protocols that would alert other teams to countermeasures being implemented. Colonel, I believe there may be an approach that could neutralize the logistics support without alerting the infiltration teams to countermeasures, Mylene said, her voice carrying the quiet confidence that had characterized her analysis throughout the crisis. The transportation networks they're using for final coordination are vulnerable to disruption that would appear to be routine infrastructure problems rather than targeted countermeasures. Her proposal was based on detailed analysis of the communication and transportation infrastructure that connected infiltration teams to their coordination centers. The enemy's operational security had focused on preventing detection of team positioning and target selection, but their logistics requirements created dependencies on civilian infrastructure that could be disrupted through methods that would appear to be routine maintenance activities or equipment failures. Carefully coordinated infrastructure disruptions could isolate infiltration teams from their coordination networks without creating the kind of obvious countermeasures that would trigger accelerated attack execution. Colonel Hawkins immediately recognized the potential of an approach that could neutralize threats through disruption rather than direct confrontation. The logistics dependencies that Mylene had identified represented exactly the kind of operational vulnerability that could be exploited without revealing the scope of intelligence penetration that had identified the threat network. Infrastructure disruptions could be implemented through civilian contractors and utility personnel who were unaware of their role in counterintelligence operations, maintaining operational security while creating the coordination failures that would prevent effective execution of coordinated attacks. Agent Carter, I need a detailed assessment of disruption options that could be implemented within the next 4 hours, Colonel Hawkins said, her authorization representing recognition that Mylene's infrastructure expertise had become essential for operational planning that exceeded conventional response capabilities. We need to understand which systems are most vulnerable to disruption and how those disruptions could be implemented without creating obvious patterns that would alert enemy coordination to countermeasures. The operational planning that followed represented a fundamental departure from conventional intelligence and military responses to identified threats. Instead of direct confrontation or obvious countermeasures, the approach focused on creating system failures that would prevent coordinated execution while maintaining the appearance of routine infrastructure problems. Mylene's analysis provided the foundation for understanding which disruptions would be most effective while remaining consistent with normal patterns of infrastructure, maintenance, and occasional equipment failure. Her assessment identified 3 categories of infrastructure that provided essential support for infiltration team coordination while remaining vulnerable to disruption through apparently routine activities. Communication systems that connected teams to coordination centers could be disrupted through maintenance activities that would appear to be routine network upgrades. Transportation networks that enabled final positioning and logistics support could be interrupted through traffic management and construction activities that would appear to be normal urban infrastructure maintenance. Power distribution systems that supported electronic equipment and communication capabilities could be affected through load balancing and maintenance procedures that would appear to be routine utility operations. The implementation required coordination with civilian infrastructure operators who could execute disruptions without understanding their role in counterintelligence operations. Utility companies, telecommunications providers, and transportation authorities would be contacted through emergency coordination protocols that would authorize immediate infrastructure activities while maintaining operational security about the actual objectives being pursued. The disruptions would be coordinated to appear random while creating systematic communication and logistics failures that would prevent effective coordination of attacks against critical infrastructure. Colonel Hawkins activated emergency coordination protocols that connected Fort Harrison directly to infrastructure management centers across multiple countries, her authority providing access to civilian systems that normally operated independently of intelligence activities. The coordination required careful balance between providing sufficient authorization to enable immediate infrastructure modifications while maintaining operational security that would prevent any indication that the activities were connected to counterintelligence operations. Mylene's role expanded from analytical support to operational coordination as her understanding of infrastructure systems became essential for implementing disruptions that would appear routine while achieving specific operational objectives. Her workstation was reconfigured to provide direct communication with utility control centers and transportation management facilities, her expertise guiding implementation of infrastructure modifications that would create precisely the communication and logistics failures needed to prevent coordinated attacks. The operational execution required unprecedented coordination between intelligence services and civilian infrastructure operators, with Mylene serving as the primary interface for technical coordination that had to be implemented without revealing the counterintelligence objectives being pursued. Her ability to communicate technical requirements in language that utility operators could understand while maintaining operational security about the actual threats being addressed became essential for achieving disruptions that would prevent attacks without triggering alternative execution protocols. As implementation began, real-time intelligence from Blackbird 7 and other field operatives provided confirmation that infiltration teams were beginning to experience the communication and coordination difficulties that the infrastructure disruptions were designed to create. Communication protocols that had enabled coordination between teams and their control centers were being interrupted by network maintenance activities that appeared to be routine telecommunications system upgrades. Transportation routes that had provided final positioning capabilities were being affected by traffic management modifications that appeared to be normal urban infrastructure maintenance. The effectiveness of the approach was confirmed through signal intelligence that detected increasing communication attempts as infiltration. Teams struggled to maintain contact with coordination centers through systems that were experiencing apparently random failures. The communication attempts revealed operational procedures and backup protocols that provided additional intelligence about enemy capabilities while confirming that the infrastructure disruptions were creating exactly the coordination failures that operational planning had intended to achieve. More significantly, the infrastructure disruptions were preventing the coordinated timing that was essential for achieving the strategic objectives that had motivated the entire operation. Individual infiltration teams retained their technical capabilities and positioning near critical infrastructure, but their ability to execute coordinated attacks that would create cascading failures across multiple systems was being systematically degraded through communication and logistics disruptions that appeared to be routine infrastructure problems. The operational success was measured not through dramatic confrontations or obvious victories, but through the gradual degradation of enemy coordination capabilities that prevented execution of attacks designed to destabilize multiple governments simultaneously. Intelligence monitoring confirmed that infiltration teams were experiencing increasing operational difficulties while remaining unaware that their problems were the result of systematic countermeasures rather than routine infrastructure issues. Colonel Hawkins' coordination with allied intelligence services revealed similar patterns of operational disruption across multiple countries, where the infrastructure approach was proving effective for neutralizing threats that conventional military and intelligence responses had been unable to address within the available timeline. The operational success represented validation of analytical approaches that had been dismissed during routine threat assessment, but were proving essential for addressing threats that exceeded conventional response capabilities. As afternoon approached, continued intelligence monitoring confirmed that the infrastructure disruptions had successfully prevented coordinated execution of attacks that could have achieved strategic objectives through simultaneous targeting of critical infrastructure across multiple countries. The quiet operational success had been achieved through technical expertise and systematic implementation rather than dramatic intervention, with Mylene's infrastructure analysis providing the foundation for countermeasures that had prevented regional destabilization while maintaining operational security that kept enemy forces unaware of the scope of intelligence penetration that had identified their activities. The operations center at Fort Harrison had evolved throughout the day, from crisis response facility to coordination hub for one of the most successful counterintelligence operations in recent memory. Multiple large displays now showed real-time status updates from infrastructure systems across 4 countries, their green indicators confirming that critical facilities remained operational while enemy coordination networks experienced systematic degradation. Communication equipment that had been hastily activated during the overnight emergency was now managing the complex information flows required to maintain operational security. while documenting success that would reshape understanding of infrastructure-based counterintelligence capabilities. Mylene sat at the coordination workstation that had become the nerve center for implementing infrastructure disruptions across multiple civilian systems. Her technical expertise having guided implementation of countermeasures that prevented coordinated attacks without revealing the scope of intelligence penetration that had identified the threat network. Her monitors displayed status information from power grids, telecommunications networks, and transportation systems were carefully orchestrated. Maintenance activities had created communication failures that appeared routine while systematically degrading enemy operational capabilities. The afternoon intelligence briefing confirmed the operational success through multiple independent sources that provided comprehensive assessment of enemy coordination breakdown. Blackbird 7 reported continued observation of infiltration teams, whose attempts to maintain contact with coordination centers were being frustrated by communication system failures that appeared to be routine telecommunications maintenance. Signal intelligence confirmed increasing desperation in enemy communication attempts as teams struggled to overcome infrastructure problems that were preventing coordinated execution of planned attacks. Most significantly, intercepted communications revealed that enemy command elements were beginning to attribute coordination failures to operational security compromises rather than systematic countermeasures, leading to decisions that further degraded their operational capabilities. Teams were being recalled from advanced positions to prevent what enemy leadership believed to be intelligence penetration of their operational networks, creating exactly the kind of disruption that conventional military responses had been unable to achieve within the available timeline. Colonel Hawkins addressed the assembled intelligence personnel with the kind of professional satisfaction that accompanied successful resolution of threats that had initially appeared to exceed available response capabilities. Her briefing documented operational success that had been achieved through innovative application of infrastructure expertise rather than conventional military or intelligence responses, representing validation of analytical approaches that had been overlooked during routine threat assessment. The coordinated infrastructure approach has successfully prevented attacks that could have destabilized government and economic functions across multiple countries, Colonel Hawkins said. Her assessment delivered to personnel whose expertise had been essential for understanding and addressing threats that exceeded conventional analytical frameworks. The enemy's operational capabilities remain intact, but their coordination networks have been systematically degraded through infrastructure disruptions that maintain the appearance of routine maintenance activities. The documentation of operational success required careful balance between recognizing innovative approaches that had proven effective while maintaining operational security about specific methods and capabilities that might be needed for addressing similar threats in the future. The infrastructure disruption techniques that had prevented coordinated attacks represented new counterintelligence capabilities that would require protection through classification protocols that ensured continued effectiveness against sophisticated threats. Webb's participation in the afternoon briefing reflected fundamental changes in his understanding of threats that required analytical approaches, extending beyond conventional military assessment. His expertise in regional analysis had been essential for confirming enemy capabilities and positioning, but the operational success had been achieved through infrastructure analysis that his conventional framework had been unable to accommodate. His professional recognition of Mylene's contributions carried the weight of someone whose own expertise had been proven inadequate for addressing threats that exceeded established analytical categories. Mylene's infrastructure analysis provided the foundation for understanding enemy vulnerabilities that conventional threat assessment had missed entirely, Webb said, his acknowledgement representing professional recognition that extended beyond the immediate operational success to encompass validation of analytical approaches that he had previously dismissed. Without her pattern recognition and technical expertise, we would have been limited to conventional responses that were inadequate for the timeline and operational sophistication we were facing. Martinez's signal intelligence expertise had been essential for confirming the effectiveness of infrastructure disruptions through monitoring of enemy communication attempts and coordination failures. Her technical background had provided real-time assessment of operational success while maintaining the electronic surveillance capabilities that ensured continued intelligence about enemy activities. Her recognition of Mylene's contributions reflected technical appreciation for expertise that had proven essential for addressing threats that exceeded conventional signal intelligence capabilities. The infrastructure approach created exactly the kind of systematic communication failures that prevented coordinated execution while maintaining operational security about our detection and response capabilities, Martinez said, her technical assessment confirming operational success that had been achieved through methods that conventional electronic warfare and signal intelligence had been unable to implement. Mylene's understanding of civilian infrastructure systems provided capabilities that our conventional technical expertise could not have achieved independently. Thompson's counterintelligence background had been focused on assessing whether American intelligence had been compromised during enemy preparation phases, but his analysis had revealed that operational security had been maintained throughout the response implementation. His expertise had confirmed that infrastructure disruptions had been implemented without creating patterns that would alert enemy intelligence to systematic countermeasures, ensuring continued effectiveness of approaches that might be needed for addressing similar threats in the future. The operational security maintained throughout implementation ensures that enemy forces remain unaware of our detection and response capabilities, Thompson said, his assessment providing confirmation that innovative approaches had been successfully implemented without compromising future operational effectiveness. Mylene's coordination with civilian infrastructure operators achieved operational objectives while maintaining the operational security that ensures continued effectiveness of these approaches. The international coordination that had been essential for implementing infrastructure disruptions across multiple countries was providing additional confirmation of operational success through allied intelligence services whose governments had faced immediate threats from infiltration teams positioned near critical infrastructure. Communication from European intelligence centers confirmed that similar infrastructure approaches had proven effective for neutralizing threats that conventional military and police responses had been unable to address within the available timeline. The coordination with allied services was revealing the broader implications of operational success that extended beyond immediate threat prevention to encompass development of new counterintelligence capabilities that could address sophisticated threats designed to exploit gaps between intelligence, detection, and operational response. The infrastructure approach represented innovative methods that could be adapted for addressing similar threats in different regions and operational contexts. Director James Patterson from the Central Intelligence Agency arrived at Fort Harrison during the afternoon to provide direct oversight of operational documentation and assessment of innovative approaches that had proven effective for addressing threats that exceeded conventional response capabilities. His presence represented recognition that operational success had implications extending beyond regional threat assessment to encompass development of new counterintelligence methods that could affect national security planning. Director Patterson's briefing with Colonel Hawkins and the operational team focused on understanding the technical and procedural innovations that had made infrastructure disruption effective while maintaining operational security that ensured continued effectiveness. His questions revealed professional interest in approaches that could be adapted for addressing similar threats in other operational contexts while maintaining the classification levels that would protect innovative methods from enemy adaptation. Agent Carter, Your infrastructure analysis provided capabilities that our conventional intelligence and military responses were unable to achieve. Director Patterson said, his recognition representing acknowledgement from the highest levels of American intelligence that innovative analytical approaches had proven essential for addressing sophisticated threats. The operational success demonstrates the importance of technical expertise that extends beyond conventional intelligence categories. Mylene's response reflected the professional modesty that had characterized her approach throughout her career. At Fort Harrison, her focus remaining on the work itself rather than the recognition that accompanied successful resolution of unprecedented threats. Her technical expertise had been essential for understanding and addressing vulnerabilities that conventional approaches had been unable to exploit. But her satisfaction came from operational success rather than professional advancement. The infrastructure approach was effective because it addressed enemy dependencies that conventional threat assessment had not identified. Mylene said, her assessment focusing on technical aspects of operational success rather than personal recognition. The enemy's operational sophistication created vulnerabilities in their logistics and coordination networks that could be exploited through civilian infrastructure systems that they had not considered as potential countermeasure vectors. The documentation of operational procedures and technical innovations required extensive coordination with classification authorities who needed to balance recognition of successful methods with protection of capabilities that would be essential for addressing similar threats in the future. The infrastructure disruption techniques represented new counterintelligence capabilities that would require careful protection through security protocols that ensured continued effectiveness against sophisticated enemies. The afternoon concluded with comprehensive assessment of lessons learned from addressing threats that had exceeded conventional analytical frameworks and response capabilities. The operational success had been achieved through integration of technical expertise that had been overlooked during routine threat assessment, demonstrating the importance of analytical approaches that extended beyond established intelligence categories. Personnel assignments and recognition procedures reflected the fundamental changes in understanding that had emerged from addressing threats that required innovative approaches extending beyond conventional intelligence and military capabilities. Mylene's role was being expanded to include development of infrastructure analysis capabilities that could be applied to similar threats in other operational contexts. Her expertise now recognized as essential for addressing sophisticated enemies who designed operations to exploit gaps in conventional response capabilities. The secure communications that connected Fort Harrison to intelligence centers around the world carried confirmation that coordinated attacks had been successfully prevented through approaches that maintained operational security while neutralizing threats designed to destabilize multiple governments simultaneously. The quiet success represented validation of analytical persistence and technical expertise that had been dismissed during routine operations, but proved essential when conventional approaches were inadequate for addressing unprecedented threats. As evening approached, the operations center returned to routine configuration while maintaining enhanced monitoring capabilities that would provide early warning of similar threats in the future. The crisis response equipment was secured according to protocols that would enable rapid reactivation if similar coordination was required, while the personnel who had been essential for operational success returned to assignments that reflected expanded understanding of capabilities that would be needed for addressing sophisticated threats. The success had been achieved through quiet competence rather than dramatic intervention, with technical expertise providing the foundation for countermeasures that prevented regional destabilization while maintaining the operational security that ensured continued effectiveness of innovative approaches. The recognition was complete, but the most important aspect of the resolution was the preservation of capabilities that would be essential for addressing similar threats that sophisticated enemies would undoubtedly develop in response to changing strategic environments. Outside Building C, the November rain had finally stopped, leaving clear skies that reflected the successful resolution of threats that had initially appeared to exceed available response capabilities. The base resumed its normal rhythm of operations, while maintaining the enhanced analytical capabilities that would provide early warning of threats designed to exploit the gaps between intelligence, detection, and operational response. The quiet triumph represented validation of approaches that had been overlooked by conventional frameworks but proved essential when the stakes required innovation rather than adherence to established procedures. 3 weeks after the crisis that had transformed Fort Harrison from a routine intelligence facility into the coordination center for preventing international catastrophe, the base had settled into a new rhythm that reflected fundamental changes in how infrastructure threats were understood and addressed. The November sky had cleared to reveal the kind of crisp autumn weather that made the installation's buildings and training grounds appear sharp and purposeful against the distant tree line. The emergency equipment had been secured and enhanced readiness configurations that would enable rapid response to similar threats, while new analytical capabilities had been integrated into routine operations that now included infrastructure assessment as a primary component of threat evaluation. Mylene's workspace in room 312 had been expanded to accommodate the additional monitoring equipment and secure communication systems that supported her new role as Director of Infrastructure Threat Analysis, a position created specifically to institutionalize the analytical approaches that had proven essential for preventing coordinated attacks designed to exploit civilian infrastructure vulnerabilities. Her 3 monitors had been supplemented by additional displays that provided real-time status information from critical infrastructure systems across multiple allied countries, creating a global overview capability that would enable early detection of threats similar to those that had nearly achieved strategic surprise. The morning briefing materials that appeared in her secure inbox now included infrastructure development reports from intelligence assets across 4 continents, their analysis integrated with conventional military and political intelligence to provide comprehensive threat assessment that addressed both traditional security concerns and the emerging category of infrastructure-based asymmetric warfare. Her analytical framework had been adopted as the standard methodology for evaluating threats that exceeded conventional military planning, with training materials being developed to enable other analysts to apply similar approaches to their regional specializations. Her colleagues' attitudes reflected transformations that extended beyond professional recognition to encompass fundamental changes in how analytical expertise was valued within the intelligence community. Webb's morning greeting carried genuine respect for expertise that had proven essential when conventional analytical frameworks were inadequate for addressing unprecedented threats. His own analytical methods had been enhanced through collaboration with infrastructure specialists, creating integrated assessment capabilities that addressed both traditional military threats and the sophisticated vulnerabilities that enemies could exploit through civilian systems. Agent Rodriguez, who had joined the unit as a replacement for additional analytical capacity needed to support expanded infrastructure monitoring, brought expertise in economic intelligence that complemented Mylene's technical focus. His background in financial systems analysis provided insights into the economic indicators that often preceded infrastructure-based threats, enabling earlier detection of planning activities that might otherwise remain invisible until operational preparation phases. His integration into the team reflected organizational changes that emphasized collaborative analysis rather than individual expertise operating in isolation. The weekly intelligence briefing had been restructured to include infrastructure assessment as a primary component of threat evaluation rather than background information supporting conventional military analysis. Conference room and now featured additional displays that provided real-time infrastructure status, information alongside traditional satellite imagery and communication intercepts. The briefing format encouraged analytical discussion that integrated technical expertise with operational planning, creating assessment capabilities that addressed threats, designed to exploit gaps between different analytical specializations. Colonel Hawkins' leadership of the briefing reflected her recognition that preventing future crises required analytical approaches that extended beyond established intelligence categories. Her questions encouraged integrated analysis that considered infrastructure vulnerabilities alongside conventional military threats, while her coordination with civilian infrastructure operators had been formalized through protocols that enabled rapid implementation of protective measures without compromising operational security. About intelligence capabilities, the morning's briefing focused on emerging patterns of infrastructure development in regions experiencing political instability, with particular attention to construction activities that exhibited characteristics similar to those that had provided early warning about the coordinated attack network. Mylene's analysis had identified 3 separate infrastructure projects that warranted enhanced monitoring, their timing and technical specifications suggesting possible preparation for operations that could exploit civilian systems for strategic objectives. Her presentation demonstrated the analytical methodology that had been developed through documentation of the successful counterintelligence operation, providing systematic approaches for identifying infrastructure vulnerabilities that could be exploited by sophisticated enemies. The methodology integrated technical assessment of civilian systems with intelligence about enemy capabilities and strategic objectives, creating comprehensive evaluation frameworks that addressed threats designed to remain invisible until execution phases. Captain Sarah Chun, who had been promoted to major following her contributions to the infrastructure disruption operation, provided technical analysis that confirmed the effectiveness of monitoring approaches that had been implemented across allied intelligence services. Her coordination with international partners had revealed similar patterns of infrastructure-based threat development in other regions, suggesting that enemies were adapting their strategic planning to exploit civilian system vulnerabilities that conventional military responses were unable to address effectively. The international coordination that had been essential for preventing the coordinated attacks had evolved into permanent intelligence sharing arrangements that provided global oversight of infrastructure threats across multiple allied countries. Communication protocols had been established that enabled rapid coordination of protective measures while maintaining operational security about specific capabilities and methods that would be needed for addressing similar threats in the future. Director Patterson's quarterly assessment visit to Fort Harrison provided oversight of analytical innovations that had implications extending beyond regional threat assessment to encompass development of new counterintelligence capabilities that could affect national security planning across multiple operational contexts. His review of infrastructure analysis methods confirmed their effectiveness for addressing threats that exceeded conventional intelligence frameworks, while validating approaches that could be adapted for different regional and technical environments. The infrastructure analysis capabilities developed here have become essential components of national security planning, Director Patterson said during his briefing with the expanded analytical team. The methods you've developed for detecting and countering sophisticated threats have been implemented across multiple intelligence centers, providing capabilities that address vulnerabilities that our conventional approaches had been unable to identify. The recognition extended beyond individual acknowledgement to encompass institutional changes that reflected fundamental shifts in how intelligence services understood and addressed emerging threats. Training programs had been developed that integrated infrastructure analysis with conventional intelligence methods, creating educational frameworks that prepared analysts for addressing threats that required technical expertise extending beyond traditional military and political assessment, Mylene's role in developing. These training materials reflected her continued focus on the work itself rather than the recognition that accompanied her expertise. Her contributions to analytical methodology development were guided by the same systematic approach that had characterized her infrastructure monitoring during routine operations, with attention to detail and pattern recognition that ensured comprehensive coverage of vulnerabilities that sophisticated enemies might exploit. The afternoon coordination session with allied intelligence services provided updates on infrastructure protection measures that had been implemented based on analytical methods developed at Fort Harrison. European intelligence centers reported successful application of infrastructure assessment techniques that had enabled early detection of planning activities similar to those that had preceded the coordinated attack attempt. Asian intelligence services had adapted the analytical framework for addressing region-specific infrastructure vulnerabilities while maintaining coordination capabilities that enabled rapid information sharing about emerging threats. The global implementation of infrastructure analysis capabilities represented validation of approaches that had been dismissed during routine threat assessment, but proven essential when conventional methods were inadequate for addressing sophisticated threats. The coordination networks that connected Fort Harrison to intelligence centers around the world provided continuous monitoring of infrastructure development patterns that could indicate preparation for operations designed to exploit civilian system vulnerabilities. Lieutenant Kim's night shift responsibilities in the Secure Communications Center had been expanded to include oversight of infrastructure monitoring networks that provided real-time status information from critical systems across multiple countries. Her technical expertise in encrypted communications had been essential for establishing secure coordination protocols that enabled international information sharing while maintaining operational security about specific capabilities and methods that would be needed for addressing similar threats. The Communications Center had been enhanced with additional equipment that provided direct interfaces with civilian infrastructure management systems, enabling rapid coordination of protective measures that could be implemented without revealing intelligence capabilities to potential adversaries. The technical integration represented innovative approaches that addressed operational requirements while maintaining the security protocols that ensured continued effectiveness of counterintelligence methods. As evening approached, the base settled into operational rhythms that reflected permanent changes in analytical capabilities and coordination procedures that had emerged from successfully preventing international catastrophe through innovative approaches that exceeded conventional intelligence and military responses. The enhanced monitoring systems continued their oversight of global infrastructure development while personnel prepared for night shift operations that maintained continuous vigilance against threats designed to exploit vulnerabilities that conventional security measures were unable to address. Mylene's evening review of the day's intelligence confirmed continuing effectiveness of analytical approaches that had been validated through operational success while identifying emerging patterns that suggested enemies were adapting their strategic planning to address countermeasures that had proven effective during the coordinated attack prevention. Her analysis provided early warning about adaptive enemy capabilities, while documenting the need for continued innovation in analytical methods that could address evolving threats. The quiet satisfaction that accompanied successful integration of innovative analytical approaches into routine intelligence operations reflected validation of persistence and technical expertise that had been overlooked during conventional threat assessment but proven essential when stakes required capabilities extending beyond established frameworks. The recognition was complete, but the most important aspect of the transformation was the preservation and enhancement of capabilities that would be essential for addressing sophisticated threats that enemies would undoubtedly develop in response to changing strategic environments. The evening shift change brought personnel whose expertise would maintain continuous oversight of global infrastructure, monitoring while providing coordination capabilities that enabled rapid response to emerging threats. The handoff procedures reflected organizational changes that emphasized collaborative analysis and integrated assessment rather than individual expertise, operating within isolated specializations. The systematic approach to threat detection and response had been institutionalized through procedures that ensured continued effectiveness, regardless of personnel changes. Outside Building C, the clear autumn sky provided visibility that extended to the distant mountains that bordered the installation. The base lights created steady points of illumination that marked the continuing operation of facilities dedicated to protecting national security through innovative approaches that addressed threats designed to exploit vulnerabilities that conventional security measures were unable to detect or counter effectively. The transformation that had begun with dismissal of quiet, analytical persistence had evolved into fundamental changes in how intelligence services understood and addressed emerging threats that required technical expertise extending beyond traditional military and political assessment. The institutional recognition of infrastructure analysis as essential intelligence capability represented validation of approaches that had been marginalized during routine operations but proven critical when conventional methods were inadequate for preventing international catastrophe. The lasting impact extended beyond operational success to encompass educational and procedural changes that would influence intelligence analysis for years to come. The analytical methodology that had prevented coordinated attacks had been documented and distributed through training programs that prepared intelligence professionals for addressing threats that required integration of technical expertise with conventional analytical approaches. The quiet competence that had characterized Mylene's approach throughout her career had become the foundation for capabilities that would protect critical infrastructure and government functions against sophisticated enemies who designed operations to exploit gaps in conventional security planning. The work continued, guided by the same attention to detail and systematic analysis that had proven essential for detecting and countering threats that exceeded established analytical frameworks. The recognition was lasting, but the most important validation was the knowledge that innovative approaches had prevented catastrophic attacks, while establishing capabilities that would be essential for addressing similar threats in an environment where enemies would continue to develop sophisticated methods for achieving strategic objectives through exploitation of civilian infrastructure vulnerabilities. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.